So update time for Rocky. And as you can see here, new rubber, new shoes. Some great looking BF Goodrich radial TAs. These are size 255 60 15s. They're actually a wider series than stock. Stock is a 225 70 15. But this one here, this tire is a little bit wider, but it is the same height as stock. And I just think it fills up the wheel wells nice, gives it a nice stance. They look good on the 8-inch turbo wheels. That's what I like to run on these cars. I think they look really good. So moving on, decided to kind of do some carburetor stuff, see what we can get figured out. And one of the first things I noticed as I'm diving into this is that we have some vacuum hoses that are not correct. Not at all. So right now, this is our power enrichment valve, and I was looking at taking off the hoses and everything, and although the center hose here is correct, coming off the top of the carburetor, this hose here is supposed to be what is controlling the metering rods and should be hooked up underneath, it's kind of hard to see, on the center port underneath the carburetor here, and it is not. It's actually going to a ported vacuum port, for which typically this is for timing control, ported vacuum for your vacuum advance. So I'm not sure why they have vacuum fighting vacuum. Both vacuum sources. You got two different vacuum sources going to this valve. It does absolutely nothing. The interesting part is that they actually took, I believe this is to be the vacuum advance hose, and that is going to the port that is controlling the metering rod. So there's no vacuum advance going to the distributor right now. So those are actually backwards. And like I said, I wasn't happy with seeing the holes drilled into the choke plate. Obviously they were having trouble with the choke. The red wire that I had mentioned in the previous video I thought was probably going to the electric choke. Instead it was actually spliced for the knock sensor. I unplugged it. I don't know if that's really going to work well for the knock sensor. I thought that was a special wire or possibly a special resistance to the wire. It doesn't matter. We're probably going to end up disabling it anyway and putting the bypass in it. But so what do we have? Well, I was going to rebuild that carburetor, but I didn't like the choke plate with the holes in it. I happen to have a really nice carburetor in stock that I had picked up. And this is a remanufactured unit. And usually I don't like remanufactured carburetors from like auto parts stores and stuff. This one was really clean. I did take it apart though, went through it, made my modifications, double checked some things on it. It does have the correct secondary metering rods in it. We checked those out. It does have DX rods, which is good. I replaced the accelerator pump because it was feeling a little funny. New fuel filter in it. I did notch my secondary air valve, and I modified the secondary air valve to open a little bit farther, and put in updated or actually richer primary jets and metering rods on the primary side. So we have that in there, and a different power piston spring. Made the different adjustments that I usually do. Put a new choke housing on it also. This is actually one that I offer that is correct, that has the electrical connection at the top, because most of the ones that you get, the electrical connections at the bottom, and it actually interferes with the turbo. So new base plate gasket. I'm going to swap this on there, and at this time I'm probably going to leave the power enrichment valve disconnected until I can get it rebuilt, which will be next. But let's get this carburetor swapped out and see what we got. And just like that, through the magic of video, the carb is on. So we have the new carburetor installed. I did correct the vacuum hose for the vacuum advance. We have it hooked up to the correct ported vacuum right there. I did leave the PEVR unplugged at the moment, which is something that you can do to get by. What it's going to do is it's going to allow everything to run a little bit rich. The metering rods are going to be out of the jets. It's just going to run rich, but it should run fine. I did cap off the vacuum port for the PEVR, but you have to leave the port at the bottom open. That port has to stay open because that is where, oh, can we even get to it? Can we see it? Yep, there it is. We leave that one open. We don't plug that one. That's just the, that's where the vacuum source actually goes to control the metering rod, so we don't need to cap that one. And other than that, well, let's see if it starts. And then I got the timing light out. We're going to check timing because I'm a little concerned since the vacuum advance hose was in the incorrect spot. I'm hoping that the timing is actually set correctly. So let's see what happens here. We'll have to crank it over a few times, let the fuel pump start filling up the float bowl inside the carburetor, and then we should be able to get it running. Let's give it a shot here. I can't really get a shot. Okay, let's see how that does. Got any squirting going on of the... Oh, yeah, I can hear it. Let's see. Hopefully it goes into high idle okay. Because prior to this, the other carburetor, there was no high idle. When you started it, it idled very low. So let's see. Well, it is running. I gave it a little too much fuel on the squirting. Oh, I see we have a fuel leak. That's not a good sign. Let's get it shut off there. Retighten that. Yeah, let's get a wrench and tighten that up. Okay, looks like we got the fuel line tightened up a little bit more. No more drips. Looking good. Car's actually running pretty decent in high idle. We could always adjust the high idle speed a little bit more if we wanted to, but I don't like to make these things, scream in RPM with the choke. What we're looking for here is to make sure that the choke does open. We want the flap to start opening as the electricity heats up the electric choke. It should start to come down in RPM. Actually runs pretty good. So we'll give it a little bit of time here and see if the choke starts to open, let it warm up before we check the ignition timer. So did a double check of the timing and found that it was way advanced. Not exactly sure what was going on there. The idle was high. Yeah, the curb idle screw is backed out, the choke is open, but the idle was really high. Checked it with the timing light. It had 35 degrees of timing in it, which is just crazy. It doesn't even have that much timing in it at wide open throttle. The only thing I can figure is possibly they tried setting the timing and the knock sensor was telling the computer or telling the spark control module that there was detonation, so it was retarding the timing. So maybe somebody tried setting the timing and the spark control was retarding it. I did back the timing down to what I thought I had it at 8 degrees. I did check the weights and springs inside the distributor. They work. Got it down. It was sounding pretty good, and then I revved it a few times. It's a little bit hesitant, and now it's got an elevated idle again. The timing is up just a little bit. I think maybe because there's something going on with the weights and springs in the distributor. Either a spring broke, or they're weak, or somebody changed them. We'll have to investigate that further, but that'll be for another time. We'll do, when we do the tune-up with the new cap rotor, spark plugs, ignition wires, all that stuff, we'll double check the distributor, make sure weights and springs are working the way they should. But for right now, I think we're gonna go take it for a ride, and we're gonna go cruise it over down the block to the local Culver's restaurant because they're having a little car show today. And we'll see, we'll bring this over there just to kind of show it off. But in the meantime, that'll wrap up part 2 of this, and then of course on. Well, I'd like to say that we took the car to the car show just down the block at the Culver's restaurant, and everything was great, but that's not really the case. So shortly after shooting the video, jumped in the car, went to take off, and it would stall every time you put it in gear. Trying to figure out what that was. I didn't really have time. I just kind of nursed it and parked it for the moment before I could go back to it a couple days later. So in the video I had mentioned how the timing was very far off. I was surprised at how it could run with the timing turned up that high. And went back to the timing again, took the distributor cap off, started looking at the weights and springs. The first thing I noticed was that the springs were aftermarket. Very lightweight springs were in it, and they were not correct, but the weights looked to be stock. So I found another distributor that I had, and I put the correct springs in it, put it all back together, and was about to check the timing again, and had a friend helping me, and we looked at the vacuum again. The vacuum hoses go into the vacuum advanced canister, and found out that it was actually going to manifold vacuum, not ported vacuum. So my error was that I made an assumption that the hose that was connected to the carburetor was the one that was going to the distributor. The ported vacuum hose was actually going to the vacuum tree on the back of the carburetor, so you had a vacuum port attached to another vacuum port, which makes absolutely no sense. And the other hose then for the vacuum advance was going to the vacuum tree also. So I had manifold vacuum, all-time vacuum when the car is idling, going to the distributor, and I was trying to set the timing with vacuum advance active. So that's why I was having so many problems and why the car wanted to stall. It didn't, technically it had no timing in it after I was done with it. So rerouted the hoses, corrected the hoses for the vacuum advance, set the timing correctly. Now it runs beautiful. It fires right up, no problem, goes into high idle like it should when it's cold, and took the car for a ride, and it is very peppy, very spunky. It just runs down the road awesome, and that's not even getting into boost yet. So lesson learned, check those vacuum hoses, check the vacuum routing. Don't automatically assume that they're going where they should. And if it seems like there's a problem with it, most likely there is. So that's where we're going to end this video for the second part of Rocky. Hopefully soon we'll be getting into more in depth with some stuff like exhaust work and putting the boost lights on and the water injection and all that stuff. So be sure to tune in next time as we progress even further with Rocky. Thanks for watching.